Hello, my name's Andy. Welcome to episode 73 of Keeping Water. As you can see, I'm in front of the green screen again, and there's a reason for that, as always, and it's pretty similar to the one last week, and that is I haven't got the next main episode finished, and this week I'm really quite poorly. I'm waiting for a COVID PCR test result, and we'll see what comes out of that. So no main episode this week. So I thought I'd tell you what that main episode is going to be about. So basically, I'm looking at carp and nutrition, what they like to eat, what they need to eat, what attracts them in food, what puts them off in food, and how their health can be improved if they have a really good diet. So that's what I'm looking into, and fortunately there's quite a lot of research out there. That's not always the case for things around carp and fish and pond keeping, but there's a fair amount out there. So I'm still working on it. I'm still doing lots of searching and reading and planning how I'm going to put it together, but it's not out yet. It will be out soon, but I'm not promising when. Which kind of brings me on to my decision I've made about how I'm going to make videos, and thank you for everyone who shared their thoughts. It's going to be pretty similar to what I was probably leaning towards when I made last week's video, and that is, rather than make one of those main complicated episodes every week, I'm going to make them when they're ready. And that means I'm going to do the work, do a really good job in making those videos, make them as well edited and well filmed as they need to be, and then bring them out when they're done. And in the middle, in between those videos, I can do this kind of video, which takes a lot less effort, a lot less editing, and will still mean I'm releasing content and still keeping you up to date on things. So that's the plan. It won't necessarily be every 2 weeks that I have one of the main episodes. It might be 5 weeks in between. But we'll see. Fortunately, the video I put out last week for my channel was quite popular, and I had lots of really nice comments and a comparatively large amount of views. So I was pretty happy with that. So on to this week's video. What I'm going to talk about is just have a little review of the pond over 2021, which was a year full of me trying to do things, not necessarily successfully, and some things out of my control, and some good decisions and some bad decisions. But I thought I'd have a little review. I do a review of the channel as such, and in terms of being a YouTuber, in June, which is the kind of anniversary of when I started the channel. But for now, in the calendar year, as we're approaching the end of it quite rapidly, I thought I'd do a little review of the pond. And I'm going to break it down into the filtration, the plants and the fish, basically, which I think are the three main areas. In terms of the filtration, last year I got a pond vac for Christmas, which was a great help. The pond vac I've got isn't one of the more expensive ones, which you can have continuous action. It's one of those ones that stops and then empties, and then you can start again, which is a little bit annoying, but the difference in price between the two is quite great, so it was what I could have. I did do a video where I attached a GoPro to the pond vac so I could see how well it was picking up detritus, and I was a little surprised at not how poorly it did, but in terms of how slowly you had to move it around the pond to make sure you got as much of the detritus as possible. You really couldn't move it that quickly. It's when you kept it slow, it did a really good job, and it caught a lot of detritus. I made that video at a time of year when the first algae bloom of the year had died off. I put some treatment in and it died off, and so there's quite a lot, but you did have to move it really slowly. I had quite a wide attachment, like the end of a hoover, and that actually did really poorly, and just a round nozzle end worked best, actually. But anyway, you know, I guess sometimes I don't necessarily think as the pond vac as being part of the filtration because it's not a permanent thing, but actually it's your first step really in clearing out detritus of your pond. If you don't have a bottom drain and a rotary drum filter and things like that, if you have a pump fed filter like mine is, you do kind of rely on a pond vac actually. So I'm pretty pleased I've got it. It's quite labour intensive, as I'm sure you know or you can guess. And in the summer, especially when I'm doing a reasonably big clean on the filters and the pond twice a week, and I'm using the pond vac twice a week, it gets a little wearing at times. In terms of the other new additions to the filtration, I put in a moving bed this year, and there were some teething problems, I think it's fair to say. I'm not that great or that knowledgeable in understanding how water flows through systems and plumbing and all of that. And I had some issues with it overflowing and the media getting stuck to the outlets, which I fixed in a fairly clumsy and hokey way, which I've since tidied up a little bit, but it's not great. Now, the media moves how it's meant to, especially getting a new air pump really helped that. So it moves how it's meant to, which is great, and it's doing a reasonable job. I mean, my ammonia and nitrite has never been so low. So it is having a benefit to the water quality. So I've got to be happy with that, really. I would like to improve it this year or next year. Quite a few pond keepers, Lau from the French Connection, she's got a wheelie bin, which she uses, and a number of other people have as well. And they just fit the bill perfectly. So they're comparatively inexpensive. They're quite tall, which would be good in my pond rather than long. You can get quite a lot of media in them, and they're quite robust, and they won't add any toxins into the water. So they're a perfect fit, really. So I'll hopefully be getting one of them at some point. Moving on to the multi-bay and the static part of the multi-bay. So my multi-bay's got a vortex, like many. Then it's got a brush chamber. Then it's got 2 static chambers. And I started the year with Japanese matting in the final chamber and with some static K1 in the middle chamber. The Japanese matting had seen better days, I think it's fair to say. So I took that out. And I ummed and ahed about what to replace it with. And eventually I replaced it with some K1 Micro and some K Plus that I think I'd left over from my moving bed. Now, I trapped it in there because of the outlet and the problems I'd have with the moving bed. I put a grid and some mesh to stop it exiting the multi-bay, basically. And I noticed over time, and I jokingly at the time called it an upflow filter because water did move upwards through the media, which was trapped against the grid. But I did notice it was trapping a lot more detritus than the other static K1 chamber. So what I did is then added a grid and mesh to the first K1 chamber, and I do think it's more efficient in muck and detritus being caught by it and not going onto the moving bed. And I guess that would be because the flow of water compresses the K1 together within the chamber. There's less spaces and the dirt is more easily caught, which I guess is a less efficient version of what actual proper upflow filters do. The benefit of replacing the Japanese matting chamber and having those 2 static K1 chambers is obviously they do some biological work as well, as the Japanese matting did, I suppose. But they're much easier to clean. So I've got air discs underneath the K1 and I attach the hoses up and I boil them away and that cleans it, and it's really easy. Now, as I'll talk in a little bit, my system is quite labour intensive really, so anything that makes it a little bit easier is a good thing. So that's working quite well. The moving bed's quite easy to clean. I sort of brush away at the mesh to clear off any detritus, and then I drain it reasonably regularly to the sump and then pump it away, so it's quite easy. Final bit about filtration is my skimmer. I tried using some filter floss this year in the skimmer, and it did work. I did pick up a fair amount of fines because there's fines in your water all the time. I think you could have the most complicated and expensive filter system, and I think if you put filter floss at the end of it, you'd probably find some detritus. But it did work. Whether it made the skimmer less efficient, I'm not sure. I think it might have done. I think it's certainly the flow would slow down as the filter floss needed changing, and I don't know that the kind of big stuff that it was there to catch was as easily caught, and the flow through the system wasn't as good as it could have been. So I've removed the filter floss for now, and I probably won't put it back in. But more about that when I talk about an addition to the filtration that's coming hopefully in the new year. So overall, I'm pretty happy with my filter. I mean, the water quality is good. So as I say, I've never had such low ammonia and nitrite. That's doing really well. Nitrate is slightly different. So the nitrate is there's always some of it. I've had a couple of tests where it's been 0, and I have wondered from time to time why that is, because I do have a lot of plants in my pond, which you think when they're growing, you would think would be eating up the nitrate, but I always still have some measurement of nitrate in my pond. Not an unhealthy amount for the fish, but certainly enough that it encourages algae growth. And then Sydney from Koi Run suggested testing my tap water, which I did this year, and the nitrate in my tap water is higher than it is in the pond. So my filtration is not only dealing with the nitrate from the nitrification cycle, it's also dealing with nitrate that's coming in water changes from my tap water. So I think it's doing a reasonable job. There's not a lot I can do about that. I think the best thing I could do is have a trickle in, trickle out, so water changes were done more slowly, because then I think the filters would have time to cope with it better. But for a variety of reasons, that's not possible at this point in time. And it's kind of connected with what the main problem with my filter, which isn't really solvable, is drainage, really. So I don't have access to a drain in my back garden. I have to put pipework through into the front garden, which makes it a bit of a palaver, really, and stops things like nice trickle in, trickle out systems from being easily installed. And I would really like filter changes and cleans to be a little bit easier. They're much easier now than they were 2 years ago. I've made significant changes. I've got my dirty water submersible pump rather than bucketing out water and things like that. So it is generally easier, but it could always be more easy. This year's been a slightly tricky year for me personally. I've had quite low mood this year, and I could talk about pond keeping and depression and how they interact, but certainly this year it's meant that I've not been so on top of things as maybe I should be, and I've done some sort of contingency measures, like not feeding my fish as much sometimes when I know I haven't cleaned the filter as much as I should. Sometimes those twice a week, quite long jobs of an hour and a half that it takes to do everything, just didn't happen as much as they should have. But no problems with the water quality as a result, so it's okay. But I would like to make it nicer, so if anyone wants to crowdfund me a rotary drum filter, that'd be super. Right, so that's the filters. We'll now move on to the plants. Now, I did try a little test this year. I wanted some plants that looked like they were growing from the bottom of the pond, basically, so some deep water plants. But I didn't really want to have baskets exposed in the pond. So I tried a means where I used some media grid and some pebble-lined liner to try and hide where I was planting the plants. It worked okay. It didn't look great. I think if they'd been in longer, it might have looked better, as algae and sort of dirt kind of coloured it up and blended it in a bit. The fish seemed to really like it. So the fish would swim amongst it and rest in it. So it certainly kind of was something that built upon their natural behaviour, really, and they quite enjoyed it. But the moment the carp swam through them with any degree of speed, it just ripped them up and damaged them. But I knew it was just a test. It was kind of a proof of concept, and the concept wasn't really proven, I think. But I would like to build upon that next year or the year after. I would really like lilies in the pond. But I don't want exposed baskets. And the reason for that is it doesn't look particularly realistic, and also it's just more plastic for the fish deliberately or accidentally to scratch themselves on. So I don't really want it. What I used for those plants, which were quite fragile and more fragile than lilies are, didn't really work. So I'd like to have a sort of bit of a rethink, make something a bit more robust, and then try that again. In terms of the marginal plants, it's interesting. In 2020, I just let them grow. I let them grow above the water and below the water, and generally just let them grow as much as they wanted. And the problem with that is the irises especially grow to about 6 foot tall. The other plants grow both upwards and then out into the water, and the pond goes from what is not a small pond, but not a huge pond. It's 16 foot at its longest and 9 foot at its widest. but it becomes a puddle surrounded by plants really. So they all get a bit disproportionately big. And in addition, the plants that are growing out into the water and under the water just trap dirt. They're great, the fish like them, they can hide in them and under them, but it just traps dirt. And it would be a nightmare to clean that regularly enough. So this year I've kept everything trimmed back. The downside of that is there's less hiding space for fish, and if you watch my video about fish and stress, that is quite important for fish, but it's certainly helped in keeping the detritus out. And then the above water plants, the marginal plants like the irises, and when I cut them back, and it may be just me, they just look too cut back. They're very straight across the top, they're very uniform, they don't look like irises do when they're growing naturally, and aesthetically it looks a bit rough. What I'd love to be able to find are some marginal plants that grow and look like irises. They're as thick and lush as irises can grow to help that barrier against herons and just make everything look a bit more natural, but grow all year round, which would be nice, and only grow to about 3 foot. That would be perfect. But I don't know that they exist really, so that doesn't seem likely. If you know, please let me know, that'd be fabulous. And over time I'd swap them over. Right, moving on to fish. So I'll start with the rudd. I made a little fact-finding video about rudd a few weeks back. They're by and large the most successful fish in the pond, to be honest. They've grown proportionally as well as any of the other fish, although as I'll come to later, I haven't really measured the fish this year. They've matured, they're very confident in the pond, and they've spawned this year. So I now have 36 plus rudd in the pond, most 2/3 of which are fry, and they're doing really, really well. You know, if I get in the pond to do any maintenance, they'll come and swim around me to see what's going on, and they're generally really active and doing really well. They haven't appeared to become ill this year, and so they're quite the success. In terms of the fry, I haven't seen them lately, obviously with the netting on, so I don't know how they're doing with the first bits of really cold weather. There's no reason, as long as the pond doesn't completely freeze over or freeze deeply, there's no reason why they shouldn't survive. Their parents, the other rudd, they all survived the beast from the east and numerous winters, so I'm not too worried about them. The downside of that is I can't keep them all. So at the end of next summer, beginning of autumn, when they'll probably be around 3 inches, maybe a bit bigger, maybe a bit less, I will have to make a decision. I can't have that many rudd in the pond. I would say 10 at most, but I'm not sure. I'll see how it goes, and I may be moving some of them on. Speaking of which, we'll get onto the tench. So I started the year with 3 tench, 1 large one and 2 smaller ones, and I've ended the year with 1 tench. I'll get into why I moved them on in a bit, but the 1 tench I've got is doing fine. She's the original tench that I had in the pond. When I measured the fish last, which was in September 2020, I didn't measure them this year because the carp had been poorly and I didn't really want to add to their stress, to be honest. So I'm not sure exactly how long she is now, but she was 45 centimetres, which is about 1.5 feet. And that's a pretty good size for a fish in a pond. She might get a little bigger, she might not. She has, as you might have seen, and again I did a video on the tench, a bit of deformity. She's got a bit of a humpback, but it doesn't bother her in any way. It doesn't really bother her that I moved the other 2 tench on. She never really chose to swim with them. They chose to swim with her. As you may know, tench shoal is a species in the wild. My remaining tench, if she wants to swim with any other fish, she'll choose the carp anyway. If ever I saw all 3 tench together, it's because the smaller tench went to her, not the other way around. So she's much happier to go and swim next to the carp, to be honest. Yeah, why I moved the tench on, it's all connected with the other species that I didn't start the year with, and I haven't ended the year with, but in the middle, I introduced some crucian carp to the pond. Because I always wanted a quite diverse mix of species in the pond. Well, that was my original plan anyway. And I decided to have crucian carp. They're quite a popular native fish. And they're a strange fish, actually, crucian carp, because they're extremely hardy in terms of things like water temperature and water quality. And they have some quite good adaptations that they use. So for instance, if they grow in a water where there are lots of predators, they'll grow deeper because that makes them slightly harder to predate on than they would if there was fewer predators in the water. So they're a funny old fish and they're quite robust, but equally they're very timid. And it was a worry about how they get on in the pond, although I didn't think it'd be quite as bad as it was and why they wouldn't get on in the pond. When I got them, I quarantined them, and I was going to quarantine them for about 4 weeks, but after about 3, they were doing really badly in the quarantine temporary pond I had. They weren't feeding, they were often lying on their side, and they were looking very stressed and tense. So I moved them into the main pond a bit earlier. Now, where I got the crucian carp from was the same place that I bought the 2 smaller tench. And a month after I bought the 2 smaller tench, I had a parasite problem with the carp. Now that year, it took 1 dose and they were gone, so it wasn't that bad. This year, a month after I put the crucian carp into the pond, I had a parasite problem with the carp. And this year though, like many koi keepers, it was a nightmare to get rid of the parasites. And if you add that to the problems with timidity that I had with the crucian carp, it wasn't my best decision ever to not only get the crucians from where I got them, but get them at all, to be honest. Anyway, so I moved the crucians in, as I said, and to begin with, they got on quite well. And then they started to get a little bullied and they started to get even more timid. And the culprit was the common carp. Now, you may have seen a video that I put out of the common carp swimming up to one of the crucians and basically taking the crucian in its mouth and then spitting it out quite quickly. But that wasn't all it did. I watched it on one occasion feeding off the bottom quite close in and swimming past the pellets to go and basically push the crucians away and then swim back to the pellets and eat them. Now, the carp can be quite blinkered in how they conduct themselves in the pond. So if they got somewhere they want to be, either an area of the pond they want to go and sit in, or they want to get to food, they will just swim in a straight line to it, and if anything's in the way, tough. Now the tench and the rudd don't really care. They'll either get out the way and then go back, or they'll just ignore them and get pushed. They don't really care. But the crucians are different, and this behaviour from the common carp was different. It wasn't just a blinkered, I'm having this food, it was a definite detour to go and bully the crucians off it. And I'm not sure why they do it. They don't do it to the tench, they don't really do it to the rudd. I don't think they could. The rudd do swim out of their way, but the carp could never catch the rudd. The rudd are too agile and fast. So anyway, the crucians basically stopped eating and just hid down by the pipework. Well, at least 3 did. One of them was kind of oblivious to all this mistreatment, but 3 just stopped eating. So I moved them on, and I knew somebody who had a pond ready and mature and up and running. So I thought, this is too good a chance. I didn't want to leave them to maybe eventually die or whatever. So, but I also had the choice of, what do I want to do with my stocking in the pond? And I thought, actually, I want more carp. So I thought if I got rid of the tench as well as the crucian carp, I would have some space to have some more carp, which is still going to happen, and I'll update when it does, by the way. As I said, one of the effects of the crucian carp was that they brought parasites into the pond, and the fish that suffered in the main were the mirror and common carp. This year, for me and for many koi keepers, getting rid of parasites was really, really difficult. Koi keepers that I watched on YouTube would go through many, many different types of treatment before they actually got a result and got rid of the parasites. And we're not really sure why that is. Are the parasites becoming a bit more resistant? And who knows what's actually working? Now, as I sort of alluded to earlier, one of the problems in pond keeping is getting really good empirical evidence about what works and what doesn't, whether that's medicinal treatments, whether it's filtration, whether you're trying to work out how many fish you can have in a pond. It's really hard to get clear data on that. And I think 2021 and parasites is a case in point, because if you watch lots of koi channels, you'd see them use all different types of treatment, and lots of people that have different ideas about what actually worked in the end. And then you'll see me with my carp, and what worked in the end is just multiple repeated treatments, because I only have one choice of treatment because I have rodent tench in the pond. And the reason why that is, even though it's still technically the same medicine, the dosages that you give in the koi treatment in a one-off dose is stronger than the tench and rud can tolerate. So what I do with the treatment I use is you give a lower dose over a number of days. So was it that final type of medicine that some people use that got rid of the parasites, or was it just that you needed to give multiple repeated doses? So my anecdotal evidence would be it was the multiple repeated doses. Other people would be, well, actually it was that final type of treatment I used. But the thing is, we don't know, and there's not good research to tell us, which does make things very difficult. Because when you go through something that's quite challenging, that was this year with parasites, you want to feel like you've learned something from it. So what happens when it happens next time? You know what to do, you know what caused it, you know why it was difficult, you know what you did, why what you did last time didn't work. But I'm not sure that we know that, and that's difficult. The main problem really with the parasites and my carp wasn't that they got that ill, because they didn't. Now, I saw quite a few koi that got really ill when they had a parasite infection. Maybe that's because they also had a secondary infection as well, but it really affected them and changed them. And my carp didn't really do that. I think because maybe they're a wild strain of carp, they actually carried on with their life as normal. It was a mild irritation, as it was to me. It was quite irritating to me trying to get rid of it. But for my carp being a wild strain, it didn't really affect them that way. They carried on eating as normal, they carried on swimming around as normal. A couple of times I thought they had clamped fins, but actually the next second their fins were up. So they didn't really seem that bothered. It was really a mild irritation to them. Whereas, as I said, some koi that I saw online got really quite ill, either with that or, as I said, a secondary infection. My carp didn't suffer like that. Where it really got in the way for me, as well as being irritating to me in trying to cure them, was in that I'd really planned to do some work around feeding in the carp, finding out what they really liked, finding out what really worked for them, finding out what would improve their health, but also finding out how much I could give them and still maintain good water quality. But because they were poorly, I didn't think it was a good time to do that. And as I said, I haven't netted them at the end of this year to see how much they've grown from last year, just because I didn't want to add to their stress, to be honest. Maybe next year I'll get that done. Well, you know, if they're well, definitely next year I'll get that done, and I will show you the outcomes. They're doing fine, and aside from, I've definitely learned something new about them this year. The common carp seems a totally different character this year to last year, both in terms of how it treated the crucian and the fact it was probably feeding a lot more confidently and a lot more than it did in 2020, where the mirror carp definitely outfed it all the time. Right then, I think that will do. I do apologise a little bit for this video. I am feeling a little fussy-headed. I am feeling quite poorly at the moment. It's probably Omicron, COVID, or it's a really bad cold. It's one or the other, I don't know, but I'm a little fuzzy-headed. My phone is saying about 35 minutes on there. You won't be seeing about 35 minutes of video because I've had to do a lot of stopping and coughing and drinking and blowing my nose. So I do apologise. Hopefully I have a little bit more of some clear thoughts, as I've just proven in that sentence that I haven't had this time, for you next week. As I said, it will definitely not be that main video next week. We've got Christmas in between. It will be another video like this out on the 27th. Maybe the week after that for the next one, but I think I won't promise. I won't put pressure on myself. I won't rush it. I'll try and make the best video I can. But I really hope you like this video. If you did, or if you think, well, it might get better, or I might enjoy future videos, or you just like something different. I had a really nice comment from Twisted Koi, who said he enjoyed watching my videos because they are a little bit different to the kind of usual koi videos, which I really appreciated, because that's what I'm trying to do. You know, I can't do the same things that koi keepers do because I haven't got the same kind of pond. But I like to think it might be interesting because it's different. And if you think that as well, please subscribe if you're not already. I'm not that ambitious, but I'm not going to deny I wouldn't like more subscribers. I'm not going to deny that I wouldn't want to get to 1,000 subscribers and get monetized. You know, I'd love all that. I don't know about anybody else who's not at 1,000 subscribers. Do you get a little bit miffed when YouTube puts adverts in front of your video? I do. I think I should get paid, or don't put adverts in the front of my video. I would only get about £1 a week, but that's not the point. It's the principle of the thing. Anyway, that's a small rant over. I feel too poorly to rant properly today. I thank you once again for watching the video, and I will see you next week.